When gender is applied to inanimate objects, it creates a connection between language, culture, and gender. In this presentation, we will explore the gender politics and language, along with the implications on cognition due to subconscious gendering. During this presentation, we will discuss three main points. The first being that grammatical gender reinforces grammatical sexism, the second being that grammatical gender can affect cognition, and the third being that it is important to acknowledge the role of culture in discussion around language. Grammatical gender governs the agreement between nouns, pronouns, and adjectives. In many languages, inanimate objects are assigned a gender, while in other languages, objects can be assigned to a third category, called neutral or neuter. For example, son is genderless in English, but in Spanish it is feminine, and in German it is masculine. While such assignments of gender are arbitrary in some languages, other languages base gender on sex or animateness. The origins of such grammar use have been highly debated, and some theorize that grammatical gender does not assign membership to a sex group. Although it may not have been the intention, grammatical gender appears to have an influence on cognition in addition to making some languages exclusive. In his text, Animate Pronouns for Inanimate Objects, Pronominal Gender in English Regional Varieties, Peter Siemens discusses language and overall generalization along with the implications for theories of gender. He discusses concepts for categorization of gender in relation to the English language by examining language used in different locations such as Southwest England, Tasmania, and Newfoundland, before concluding that the use of animate pronouns depends on the degree of individualization the object referred to. In Spanish, we can see similar concepts in their grammar patterns. The Spanish language gives power to the masculine forms of words when those who learn the language are taught that the masculine plural is used for any group, even if there is only one male element present. Additionally, the masculine form is the default. Such subtle forms of sexism and use of grammatical gender have neurological implications. Many studies have been conducted regarding the effect of grammatical gender on one's cognition. In a study by Phillips and Boroditsky, they concluded that those who spoke in languages with gender categories for inanimate objects thought about objects as more similar to biological sex. This is in line with our argument that grammatical gender does in fact affect the way one thinks. The problem with categorizing an inanimate or gender-neutral object with a biological gender is that it reinforces both gender stereotypes and the gender binary. For example, in Spanish, there is an unmarked-marked relation between their grammar genders. An unmarked form is the default dominant term, and in Spanish, this is the masculine form. The marked form is the feminine form, which means in linguistic studies that the feminine form is unusual or divergent. Here, it is obvious that there are only two genders that are not acknowledged for use in grammar. Additionally, the feminine form of many Spanish words is just a derivation of the masculine, only adding the A at the end of the word to indicate the gender of the noun. In English, a similar action happens with both genders, and more specifically, with terms regarding stereotypical gender roles. For example, nurse becomes male nurse, and waiter becomes waitress. These are subtle indications of the roles a man or woman should fit into, and if they don't, they stray from what is normal, and it is indicated in the grammar itself. In his text, Unconscious Effects of Grammatical Gender During Object Categorization, Bastien Boutonnet discusses the use of language when categorizing everyday objects using Spanish-English bilinguals. Through his statistical study, he found language provides a bias of information when classifying objects to meaningful categories. This text displays an example of the effect language can have when thinking about animate and inanimate objects, and relates to our overall argument that grammatical gender has the ability to reinforce sexist language. The reproduction of bias of one's representations of objects through linguistic features is further exacerbated through culture. The gendering of inanimate objects is also influenced by culture, as the language of certain cultures have the ability to shape views of masculinity and femininity. Fatima Omitrafi's Language and Cognition Effects of Grammatical Gender on the Categorization of Objects is a statistical study which considers culture when looking at the object used to describe inanimate objects. The study compares the English and Arabic language, finding an effect of voice assignment to inanimate objects. Overall, the study found that in both languages, a female voice was more often assigned to a natural object, and a male voice was assigned to an artificial object. This displays the overall culture around using language when describing inanimate objects, along with the predetermined bias as a result of language across cultures. Prewitt-Freilino et al. States that countries who speak a grammatical gender language show less levels of gender equality in terms of economic participation and political empowerment. Although it's hard to say which causes which, from what we've stated earlier, there can be a system of reinforcement between both grammar and culture. While there is much to be said regarding language and gender, these are the main points we thought were of most importance. Overall, grammatical gender does have an effect on cognition, as predetermined cultural bias affects how we view everyday objects along with the use of sexist language as a result of grammatical patterns. Despite grammar having an apparent effect on cognition, it remains important to take into consideration how culture may affect categorization of objects based on sex, because culture influences gender stereotypes and gender roles, which may have an effect on how one categorizes inanimate objects based on biological sex or gender. It's important to take a look at how we assign gender to inanimate objects every day, such as calling boats she and naming hurricanes with stereotypical male or female names. Masculine and feminine forms of nouns can perpetuate grammatical sexism and can promote the idea that power and men come hand in hand, no matter how subtle this indication may be. It is possible to create a more inclusive language and consequently reduce the cognitive effects and bias witnessed in the studies presented, without changing the meaning of a word.